I was 2 years old, standing alone in a parking lot, wearing nothing but a diaper. Cars were reversing. Engines were running. People walked past me like I didn't belong to anyone. And the truth is, I didn't. No one was looking for me. Not my neighbors. Not my family. Not even my own mother. If a firefighter hadn't recognized me that day, I wouldn't be alive to tell the story. But what makes it worse is this. I didn't wander out by accident. My mother knew exactly what she was doing. Hi, my name is Mira Thompson. I'm 28 years old. And this is the story of how I went from being a forgotten child to becoming someone my own family could never ignore again. Before I continue, I want to know something. Where are you watching me from right now? Drop your country or city in the comments. I really do read them. And if stories like this, real, raw, emotional stories, mean something to you, then take a second to subscribe. Because some stories aren't just told, they're felt. Now let me take you back. Growing up, everyone told that parking lot story like it was some kind of accident. Kids wander off. Toddlers are fast. Your mom must have been tired. That's what they said. But when I turned 18, my grandmother told me the truth. My mother didn't lose me. She let me go. That day, she had a man over. Not my father. Because my father had already left long before that. He didn't die. He didn't fight. He didn't even try to stay. He just disappeared from our lives. From what I later learned, he had tried in the beginning. Tried to make the family work. Tried to be present. But my mother wasn't interested in that kind of life. She didn't want routine. She didn't want responsibility. She didn't want to be tied down. And a child was the ultimate form of being tied down. So when he left completely. No calls. No visits. No support. And just like that, I became a child with 2 living parents and no one raising me. On the day I was found outside, my mother was inside the apartment, entertaining that man. Laughing. Drinking. Living like I didn't exist. According to my grandmother, I had been crying. Pulling at her clothes. Trying to get her attention. And at some point, my mother picked me up, walked to the door, opened it, and placed me outside. Not violently. Not angrily. Just casually. Like setting down something that had become inconvenient. She closed the door and went back inside. That was it. No checking. No hesitation. No second thought. Just silence. I wondered. I don't remember it, but I've imagined it so many times that it feels like a memory. The hot ground under my feet. The confusion. The quiet. And then movement. Cars. Danger. The fire station across the street is the only reason I'm here today. One of the firefighters, my grandmother's nephew, noticed me. A toddler alone, too close to the road. He didn't hesitate. He ran, picked me up, and brought me inside. He called my grandmother. And when she arrived, everything changed. She told me later that when she saw me, her heart dropped. Because she knew. She knew something was deeply wrong. She didn't argue that day. Didn't scream. Didn't fight. She just took me into her arms and said, "This child is not safe here." But the problem was, she couldn't take me away completely. Not legally. Not permanently. So I stayed. In the same house. With the same mother. After that day, my grandmother became my shield as much as she could. She visited often. Brought food. Checked on me. Tried to fill the gaps. But she couldn't be there every moment. And when she wasn't, it was just me and my mother. Except it never really felt like I had a mother. She didn't hug me. Didn't talk to me unless she had to. Didn't ask how I felt, what I needed, or who I was becoming. I learned very early how to stay quiet, how to stay out of the way, how to exist without being noticed. Because attention, in that house, wasn't something you were given. It was something you were punished for needing. Sometimes I would try. I would bring her drawings, show her things I made, stand near her and wait, just hoping she would look at me, smile at me, choose me. But she never did. And slowly I stopped trying. Because there's something people don't understand about children. We don't just need food and shelter. We need to feel wanted. And when you grow up without that, you start believing you are the problem. That maybe you're just not enough. But everything became clearer when I was 8. That was the year my cousin moved in. And suddenly my mother changed. She laughed more, smiled more, cooked, talked, cared. All the things I had waited years for, she gave to someone else effortlessly. I remember one moment like it happened yesterday. I was standing by the doorway watching them. My mother was braiding her hair, laughing at something she said. It looked so normal, so warm, so real. And for a second, I imagined what it would feel like if that moment belonged to me. Then my mother looked up, saw me, and her face hardened instantly. "Why are you just standing there?" she snapped. "Go to your room." That was the moment something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like something fragile finally giving up. That was the day I stopped hoping she would ever love me. And that was also the day something else started growing inside me. Something stronger, something colder. A realization. If I wanted to matter in this world, I was going to have to make it happen myself. Because no one was coming to choose me. Not then. Not ever. And I didn't know it yet, but that realization would become the foundation of everything I would later become. As I got older, I became very good at something most children should never have to learn. I became easy to ignore. I learned how to make no noise, how to move around without being noticed, how to exist in a space without disturbing anyone in it. Because in that house, the less you were seen, the safer you were. But being invisible comes with a cost. You start disappearing from yourself too. By the time I turned 10, I had already stopped expecting anything from my mother. No affection, no attention, no protection. But what made it worse wasn't just her absence. It was her presence for someone else. My cousin had fully settled in by then, and my mother treated her like the daughter she actually wanted. She woke her up for school, helped her get dressed, packed her food, asked about her day, laughed with her, defended her, everything I had once imagined a mother would do. I watched her do for someone else. And the hardest part, it wasn't even hidden. It happened right in front of me, every single day. I remember one evening in particular. We were all at the table. My cousin was talking about something that happened at school, and my mother was listening, really listening, smiling, reacting, asking questions. I sat there quietly eating. At some point, I tried to speak, just to add something small. And my mother didn't even look at me. She just raised her hand, slightly, like I was interrupting something important. "Let her finish," she said. And then she went right back to my cousin. That moment stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was normal. That's how I was treated. Like background noise. Like something present, but not important. And over time, the house adjusted around that idea. If something went wrong, it was easier to blame me. If my cousin got upset, it somehow traced back to me. If my mother was in a bad mood, I became the target. Not because I did anything, but because I was the safest person to take it out on. I didn't fight back. I didn't argue. I just absorbed it. Because I had already learned something very early. When no one is on your side, defending yourself only makes things worse. The only person who ever stood up for me was my grandmother. She would notice the little things. The silence. The distance. The way I stayed in corners instead of spaces. And whenever she visited, she would pull me aside and ask, "Are you okay?" I never knew how to answer that. Because what is okay even mean when you've never experienced anything different? But she tried. She really did. She would bring me food, clothes, little things she knew I liked. She would sit with me and talk. And in those moments, I felt seen. Not fully understood, but seen enough to breathe. She used to tell me something over and over again. "You are not what they make you feel." At the time, I didn't believe her. Because everything around me told me otherwise. School became my escape. Not because it was easy, but because it was the only place where I wasn't already defined. There I wasn't the unwanted child. I was just Mira. And for the first time, people noticed me. Teachers praised my work. Classmates spoke to me. Some even liked me. It was confusing at first, because I didn't understand why anyone would choose to talk to me. But slowly, something started to shift. I realized I wasn't invisible everywhere, just at home. And that realization did something powerful. It gave me a small sense of control. So I focused on my studies, on my behavior, on being the best version of myself outside that house. Because if I couldn't be valued where I lived, then I would build a life where I was. But growth doesn't happen without resistance. And the more I started doing well in school, the more tension it created at home. My achievements weren't celebrated. They were ignored, or worse, dismissed. One time, I came home with top grades. I stood there, holding the paper, waiting. My mother glanced at it and said, "That's what you're supposed to do." And that was it. No pride. No acknowledgement. Nothing. But when my cousin passed an average test, there was celebration, excitement, reward. That's when I understood something clearly. It didn't matter what I did. I was never going to be enough in her eyes. And strangely, that realization didn't break me. It freed me. Because once you accept that someone will never give you what you need, you stop waiting for it. And that's exactly what I did. I stopped waiting, stopped expecting, stopped hoping, and instead, I started building something inside myself. Quietly, patiently, something stronger than rejection. Something that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of my transformation. Because the same girl who was ignored at home was becoming someone the world would eventually notice. And when that day came, everything would change. By the time I turned 15, something about me had changed in a way people couldn't quite explain. I was still quiet, still kept to myself, still the same girl who moved through the house like she didn't belong there. But inside, I was no longer the same. I had stopped asking for love, and once you stop asking for something you never received, you start finding other things to hold on to. For me, it became focus, discipline, control. School wasn't just an escape anymore. It became my foundation. I woke up early, stayed up late, studied harder than anyone around me. Not because someone told me to, but because I understood something very clearly now. If I didn't build a future for myself, no one else would. Teachers began to notice. At first it was small. A comment here, a question there. Then it became recognition. "Mira, excellent work. Mira, top of the class again. Mira, have you considered applying for scholarships?" That word, scholarships, changed everything. Because for the first time I saw a way out. A real one. Not just surviving in that house, but leaving it. And never having to come back. But growth comes with pressure. And the more I started standing out at school, the more uncomfortable things became at home. My success wasn't ignored anymore. It was resented. I started noticing the small changes first. The way my mother would go quiet when someone mentioned my name. The way she would shift conversations away from me. The way her tone carried something I hadn't heard before. Not indifference. Something sharper. Something colder. Then it became more direct. One evening, I was studying in the living room when she walked in and turned off the lights. "Why are you always trying so hard?" she said. I looked up, confused. "Because I have exams," I replied. She shook her head slightly, like I had said something ridiculous. "Don't think books will make you better than anyone in this house." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it hurt, but because it revealed something important. She didn't just ignore me anymore. She saw me, and she didn't like what she saw. Because for the first time, I was becoming something she couldn't control. And control was everything to her. My cousin, on the other hand, was still treated the same. Protected, guided, defended. But even she started noticing the difference between us. Not in words, but in results. While I kept progressing, she struggled. And slowly, quietly, comparisons began. Relatives would visit and say things like, "Mira is doing really well," or "You should learn from her." Those words created tension. Not just between me and my cousin, but between me and my mother. Because now, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was a reflection, and not the kind she wanted. Things escalated the year I turned 17. That was the year everything collided. My grandmother's health started declining. At first, it was small things. Fatigue, missteps, moments of confusion. But then it got worse. Hospital visits, long stays, doctors speaking in careful, controlled tones. And suddenly, the only person who had ever made me feel safe was slipping away. I spent as much time with her as I could. After school, weekends, every spare moment. Because deep down I knew. And she knew too. One afternoon, I sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand. It felt smaller than I remembered, weaker. But her eyes were still strong. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You've grown," she said softly. I tried to smile. "I had to," I replied. She nodded slowly, like she understood everything I didn't say. Then she tightened her grip on my hand slightly. "You're going to leave that house," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I didn't respond. Because I didn't know how. But she continued. And when you do, don't ever go back to being small for anyone. That sentence hit something deep inside me. Because for the first time, someone wasn't just seeing who I was. They were seeing who I could become. A few weeks later, she was gone. And with her, the only protection I had ever known. The house felt different after that. Quieter. Heavier. Not because anything had changed outwardly, but because I was completely alone now. There was no one left to notice. No one left to ask if I was okay. No one left to remind me that I mattered. And strangely, that didn't break me. It clarified things. Because when you have nothing left, you stop fearing loss. And when you stop fearing loss, you become dangerous in a very quiet way. I threw myself into my final exams, not as an escape, but as a mission. Every late night, every early morning, every moment of exhaustion, I pushed through it, because I had made a decision. I wasn't just going to leave that house. I was going to build a life so strong that no one who ignored me would ever be able to do it again. The results came in weeks later. I remember holding the paper in my hands, reading it once, then again, then a third time, just to be sure. I had done it. Top scores, scholarship-level results, a full opportunity to leave, to start over, to become something more. I walked into the house that day, holding that paper the same way I once did as a child. But this time, I wasn't waiting for approval. I wasn't hoping for praise. I was simply done. My mother looked at it, read it, and for a brief moment, something crossed her face. Not pride, not joy, something else, something close to realization. But she said nothing. And this time, neither did I, because I didn't need her words anymore. I had something better, a way out, and I was going to take it. I left that house the same way I had learned to survive in it. Quietly. No arguments. No tears. No long goodbyes. Just a small bag, my documents, and a scholarship letter that meant more to me than anything I had ever owned. My mother didn't try to stop me. She didn't ask where I was going, how I would live, or if I would be okay. She just stood there, leaning against the wall, arms folded watching, like I was just another thing leaving the house. And in a way, I was. But this time, I wasn't being put aside. I was choosing to walk away. The first few months were harder than anything I had ever experienced. People think leaving a bad home feels like freedom. It does. But it also feels like stepping into the world with no safety net. No one to call when things go wrong. No one to fall back on. No one to remind you that you matter. Just you. And whatever strength you've managed to build inside yourself. I moved into a small shared space near my school. It wasn't comfortable. Sometimes it wasn't even quiet. But it was mine. Every meal I ate, I earned. Every book I opened, I paid for through effort. Every step forward came with struggle. There were days I questioned everything. Days I felt exhausted. Days I wondered if maybe staying would have been easier. But then I would remember something simple. Staying meant disappearing. And I had already done enough of that. So I kept going. I took extra work where I could. Tutoring. Helping classmates. Anything that brought in a little more support. Not because I wanted luxury, but because I needed stability. And slowly things began to shift. My discipline started to show results. My grades remained strong. My reputation grew. Lecturers began recommending me for opportunities, programs, internships, connections I never would have had access to before. For the first time in my life, doors were opening, not because someone let me in, but because I had built the key myself. Still, it wasn't easy. There were moments where the past caught up with me, moments where I struggled to trust people, to accept kindness, to believe that someone could care without expecting something in return. Neglect doesn't just disappear. It follows you. It shapes how you see the world, how you see yourself, but I refuse to let it define my future. So I worked through it, quietly, patiently, just like I had done with everything else. Years passed, not quickly but steadily, and one day, I looked around and realized something had changed. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was stable. I had completed my studies, secured a solid position, built a life that didn't depend on anyone who had once ignored me. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. But I was something far more important. I was secure, independent, respected, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Not in a house, not in a family, but in my own life. That was my success. Not something flashy, not something loud, but something real. I built it from nothing. From silence, from rejection, from being a child no one came looking for. And I carried that with me, not as pain anymore, but as proof. Proof that I could survive anything. And then, just when life finally felt steady, my past came back. Not in memories, not in feelings, but in a phone call. I remember staring at the screen. The name felt unfamiliar, even though I knew it so well. My mother. For a moment, I just watched it ring. Because in all those years, she had never called. Not once. And now, she was. I let it ring longer than I should have. Not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to understand something. Why now? What had changed? What could she possibly want? Eventually, I answered. I didn't say anything at first. Neither did she. There was just silence. The same silence I had grown up with. But this time, it felt different. Heavier. Like it carried something underneath it. Then she spoke. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "We need to talk," she said. Not, "How are you?" Not, "I'm sorry." Just, "We need to talk." And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't about me. It never had been. And it still wasn't. Something had happened. Something serious enough to make the woman who once placed me outside like I didn't matter pick up the phone and call. I didn't respond immediately, because I wasn't that child anymore. I didn't move at her pace. I didn't react to her tone. I simply asked one question. Why? There was a pause. A long one. And when she finally answered, everything started to make sense. "I need help." Of course she did. And just like that, the roles had changed. For a few seconds after she said it, I didn't respond. "I need help." The words just hung there. Heavy, unfamiliar. Not because they were complicated, but because of who they were coming from. This was the same woman who once left me outside and went back to her life like nothing had happened. The same woman who watched me grow up without ever stepping in. And now she needed me. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence stretch. Not to punish her, but because I needed to understand what I was feeling. And strangely, it wasn't anger. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was clarity. A calm, steady clarity. "What kind of help?" I asked. Her voice shifted slightly. Less controlled now. "I'm not well," she said. "And things are not good." That was vague. Too vague. But I didn't push. Because I already knew this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. "I'll come," I said. Not because I felt obligated. Not because I had forgiven her. But because I needed to see it for myself. To understand. To close something that had been open my entire life. The journey back felt longer than it should have. Not physically, but mentally. Every step closer felt like stepping into a version of myself I had already left behind. When I arrived, the house looked smaller, older, like time had finally caught up with it. I stood outside for a moment, just looking at the door. The same door. The one that had been closed on me all those years ago. For a second, I saw it clearly. A 2-year-old child, barefoot, confused, standing on the other side of it. And then the image faded, because I wasn't that child anymore. I knocked. It took a while before the door opened. And when it did, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked thinner, weaker, her posture slightly bent, her movements slower. Her face different, not in a dramatic way, just worn, like life had quietly taken its toll over the years. For the first time, she didn't look like someone in control. She looked human. She stepped aside without saying much, and I walked in. The house hadn't changed much. Same layout, same walls, same feeling, but something was missing. The noise, the energy, the sense of someone living there fully. It felt empty. I sat down, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I noticed something. No sign of my cousin. No voices. No movement from other rooms. "Where is she?" I asked. My mother didn't look at me immediately. "She moved out," she said. "Years ago." I nodded slowly. Of course she did. The person who had been chosen had chosen herself. There was something almost ironic about that. "And now?" I asked. My mother hesitated. Then she said it plainly. "I can't manage on my own anymore." There it was. No emotion. No apology. Just the situation. She went on to explain. Her health had been declining. Medical bills had built up. Work had stopped. And slowly, everything had fallen apart. The people she once prioritized, gone. The support she assumed would always be there, gone. What was left was reality. And now, she was facing it alone. Just like I had. I listened, not interrupting, not reacting, just taking it in. Because I needed to hear it fully. Not for her, but for me. When she finished, she finally looked at me directly. And in her eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. Not love, not regret, but awareness. Like she finally understood the weight of her own choices. I need you to stay, she said. There it was. The request. Simple. Direct. And years too late, I leaned back slightly and studied her. Not as a daughter looking at her mother, but as a person looking at another person. And in that moment, something became very clear. She needed me, but I no longer needed her. That difference changed everything. I'll help, I said. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Relief. But I hadn't finished. I'll arrange care, I continued. Make sure you have what you need. Medical support. Stability. Her expression shifted. Confusion now. What do you mean? She asked. I mean I won't be staying, I said calmly. The silence that followed felt familiar. But this time, I controlled it. You're my daughter, she said, her voice tightening. And for the first time in that entire conversation, I felt something rise in me. Not anger. Something deeper. Something honest. I was your daughter when I was 2, I said. When I needed you. She didn't respond. Because there was nothing she could say. I was your daughter when I was growing up in that house, I continued. When I was invisible. Still nothing. I was your daughter every time I tried to be seen, and you chose not to see me. My voice didn't shake. Didn't rise. Because this wasn't an argument. It was the truth. Clear. Simple. Unavoidable. I'm not here because I owe you, I said. I'm here because I choose to help. And there's a difference. That was the moment everything settled. Not just in the room, but inside me. Because I finally understood something completely. This wasn't about revenge in the way people imagine it. No shouting. No confrontation. No dramatic breakdown. Just a shift. A quiet, undeniable shift. The person who was once powerless wasn't anymore. And the person who once had control didn't anymore. I arranged everything over the next few days. Professional care, medical assistance, a structure that would support her without requiring me to lose myself in the process. I made sure she would be okay. Not comfortable, not dependent on me, but okay. Before I left, she asked one question. Why are you doing this? I looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time, I answered without hesitation. I'm doing this for the version of me that deserved better, I said. Not for you. And that was the truth. Because the child who stood outside that door all those years ago didn't need revenge. She needed peace, and that's what I gave her. I walked out of that house the same way I walked in. Calm, steady, certain. But this time, I wasn't leaving as someone who had been pushed aside. I was leaving as someone who had chosen herself. And that made all the difference. If you made it this far, tell me, what would you have done in my place? And don't forget to subscribe. Because some stories aren't just heard, they stay with you.